I'm Edith. Standing on my balcony, overlooking the city as the soft breeze cuts through the noise of traffic below, I find myself in a state of peace I've never known before. The once burning pain of my family's rejection has now transformed into a gentle reminder of my journey to self-discovery. A month ago, an envelope arrived from Florida. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandfather, Victor. "It's done," it said. "The papers are signed. The properties are yours. They won't get a cent. You deserve this, Edith, for surviving them." I read it 3 times, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't out of pride, it was closure. But how did I get here? Let me take you back. I grew up in a small town in Texas. My parents, Robert and Diana, owned a family-run antique shop. It was a place filled with old treasures, but it always seemed on the verge of closing. My older sister, Stella, was the apple of my parents' eyes. From the moment she could talk, she was their golden child. Every achievement, every compliment, was directed at her. I was just the quiet one in the background. I was good with numbers. From a young age, I knew I wanted to be a financial analyst. While Stella was out making friends and being the life of the party, I was poring over books and learning about finance. When I was 15, I won a state-level financial modeling competition. My parents were supposed to be there, but they had to attend one of Stella's art exhibitions. I pretended it didn't matter, but that feeling of being overlooked stuck with me like a shadow. As adults, not much changed. The antique shop was struggling, and I started sending $800 a month to keep it afloat. I'd spend my nights rebalancing their books, fixing tax errors, and coming up with strategies to save the business. But my parents would always credit Stella for the shop's occasional success. They'd say it was her creative ideas for window displays or her networking skills that kept the customers coming. One week before my parents' 25th wedding anniversary dinner, I started to sense a change in their tone. Every time I called, my mother would bring up Stella's latest promotion at her marketing job. "Your sister is just so brilliant," she'd say, as if I hadn't been working so hard to save their business. I'd smile through the phone and say, "That's great," before hanging up before my voice could crack. When I arrived at the fancy restaurant for the anniversary dinner, I told myself I could get through the night. The place was beautiful, with soft lighting and a view of the town square. All our relatives were there, aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in ages. I took a seat at the far end of the long table, where I always sat, in the shadows. Stella walked in wearing a bright purple dress. Heads turned, and my mother's face lit up like a firework. My father clapped her on the back and called her the pride of the family. No one even noticed me sipping my water quietly. Throughout dinner, the conversation revolved around Stella. Her new projects at work, her plans for the future, and her business acumen. When someone asked about me, my mother said, "Oh, Edith helps with the numbers sometimes," and then quickly shifted the topic back to Stella. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I forced a smile. Desperate to be heard, I decided to speak up. I'd spent weeks analyzing the shop's finances and found a way to cut costs and increase profits. I cleared my throat and said, "You're overspending on inventory. If you cut some suppliers and adjust your pricing, you could turn the business around in a few months." I expected at least some curiosity, but instead, Stella tilted her head and laughed. "That's cute, Edith. Stick to your spreadsheets. I have real business sense." A few cousins joined in the laughter, and my mother waved her hand dismissively. "Sweetheart, let's not bore everyone with numbers." I felt my blood boil, but I kept my cool. "I'm not trying to bore anyone. I'm trying to save your business," I said, my voice steady. Stella smirked and said, "Relax. We're fine. You always worry too much." My father didn't even look at me. He just raised his glass and said, "Stella knows what she's doing." That was the final straw. Every little dismissal, every patronizing laugh, had built up inside me like a pressure cooker. When my father stood up to give a toast, I knew what was coming. He raised his glass in the middle of the crowded restaurant and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "We wish Stella was our only child." The room went silent. My mother just nodded, as if they'd rehearsed it. Stella's smirk flashed under the chandelier, slow and deliberate, like she'd won a battle. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stood up, the scrape of my chair louder than his toast, and walked out. As the door shut behind me, I knew they'd regret those words. When I got home, I sat on my couch and stared at my phone. My parents' group chat was still open. With steady hands, I typed, "I'm done helping with the shop. No more money. No more advice. Good luck." And I hit send. That night, the phone started ringing. First, it was my father, then my mother, and then Stella. Texts flooded in, asking what was wrong and telling me to stop being dramatic. I set the phone face down and let it buzz until the battery died. The next morning, the guilt tried to creep in, but I pushed it away. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and focused on my own clients. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. A week later, I boarded a flight to Florida. I needed distance from the chaos. My grandfather, Victor, lived in a small beach town near Miami. He was one of the few people in my family who saw me for who I was. When I arrived at his house, he was sitting on the porch, watching the ocean. He looked up, saw my face, and said, "You look like you've been through hell, sweetheart. Come inside." In his living room, with the smell of salt in the air and the hum of the old ceiling fan, I finally let it all out. I told him about the dinner, the toast, and all the years of being overlooked. I also showed him screenshots of Stella's social media posts, where she called me jealous and unstable. Grandpa's expression changed. His jaw tightened, and he said, "That's not family. That's betrayal." He walked to his desk, pulled out a folder, and said, "I've been watching the way they treat you for years. I always thought they'd change, but I was wrong." He called his lawyer that afternoon. When the lawyer arrived, I sat on the couch and listened as Grandpa said, "Cut Robert, Diana, and Stella out entirely. Leave the properties to Edith. The rest go to the local veterans charity." When I flew back to Texas, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. My phone was full of unread messages, but I knew what they said: panic, confusion, and denial. Within a week, the consequences hit. The antique shop started to crumble. Without my monthly transfers and financial guidance, the bills piled up. The suppliers refused to extend credit, and the tax penalties hit hard. Stella's reputation also took a nosedive. She'd built her image around the shop, but when it failed, her so-called business skills were exposed. The investors she'd been pitching to pulled out, and her social media posts were now being called out by our cousins. My parents' house was foreclosed, and they moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. They stopped attending family gatherings, and people started to whisper about how they'd treated me. At work, my life was moving forward. I landed a major contract for the startup I worked for, and my boss hinted at a promotion. I should have felt pure satisfaction, but what I felt was peace. One afternoon, another envelope arrived from Florida. Inside was a note and a photograph of Grandpa on his porch, with the ocean behind him. "Proud of you, kid," he'd written. "Don't waste time on people who can't see your worth." Now, as I stand on my balcony, I look at the city lights and think about the journey. My family got the life they wanted, and I got mine back. I've built a home out of peace, not approval. And I've learned that walking away isn't weakness, it's power.